CNN's Caitlin Collins is in Anchorage with me now. And Caitlin, as I was listening to the president earlier in the Oval Office, he sounds optimistic to me. And I wonder if that's what you're hearing. And what then would he base that optimism on?
He was optimistic, but he had a lot of caveats that I was actually surprised to hear, peppering in way more than he had earlier this week, or even, just a week ago when we had first been hearing from White House officials as they were cobbling this summit together, what this could potentially look like. And the president very much was saying that so much of what happens next here really does depend on what is said when he and Putin actually get in the room together 24 hours
Those first
from now.
few minutes, he said, yeah.
Hanging so much on that, saying within the first 2 minutes he thinks he would know the Russian leader is ready to make a deal, which I think is why it raises a lot of questions of what the Russians are coming here, what they'll be prepared to bring to the table, if they try to offer any distractions when it comes to trade or business deals with President Trump or investment, and something that obviously he has talked about a lot. But he added a lot of caveats about what a second meeting could look like, a second meeting that he said could even be more important than his sit-down with Putin, which would be a trilateral meeting with Putin, Trump, and Zelensky. And this is what he had to say about what that could look like and what would need to happen.
Tomorrow, all I want to do is set the table for the next meeting, which should happen shortly. I'd like to see it happen very quickly, very shortly after this meeting. I'd like to see it actually happen maybe in Alaska, where we just stay because it's so much easier. But I think that it's going to be very interesting. We're going to find out where everybody stands.
The president really hinging that on what is said when he is in the room with Putin tomorrow. But obviously this question of Zelensky coming here, one, it's an incredibly long trip from Ukraine, but two, when Putin was raised with this idea a little over a week ago about sitting down with Trump and Zelensky, he said that certain conditions would have to be met for Putin to sit down with the Ukrainian leader. Obviously, he said those conditions had not been met. He wants more Ukrainian territory, more guarantees that they would not join NATO. So that is a real question of what that looks like. And I think the question here for tomorrow for Trump is whether or not he takes this tack of trusting what Putin says if he is ready to bring this war to an end, or if we see that frustration that has been bubbling up in recent weeks where he's had good conversations with Putin, but then very much said he felt like he was potentially tapping him along. And I do think it's not an overstatement to say so much of that rides on what happens here tomorrow.
It reminds me of the Trump-Kim summits in the first administration, and there were three of those, of course. And what we saw in the last one was that when Trump felt he wasn't getting enough, he did walk away. I wonder, do you believe the president would walk away from this summit if Putin doesn't give enough ground in his view?
Potentially, but obviously we know the Russian leader is going to come prepared to cater to Trump, to appeal to him. I will say Trump's history of meeting with authoritarian leaders, these strongmen types, he has not often yielded much. Obviously, his meetings with Kim Jong-un did not. We'll see if this meeting with Putin does. But I think a lot of Russian analysts have said, this meeting in and of itself is a huge win for Putin, who has been totally isolated on the world stage and has been sanctioned, is under threat of being arrested if he goes basically to half the places in Europe. And so the meeting in and of itself is a big win for them. Whether or not what Trump sees as a win coming out of this still remains to be seen. But he very much raised this idea today, saying maybe we'll do a joint press conference if this goes well. And if not, maybe I'll just do it by myself and then I'll just go back to the United States.
Yeah, he's leaving a wide door open for himself to walk out.
Yeah.
Caitlin Collins, thanks so much.
We have a meeting with President Putin tomorrow. I think it's going to be a good meeting, but the more important meeting will be the second meeting that we're having. We're going to have a meeting with President Putin, President Zelensky, myself, and maybe we'll bring some of the European leaders along, maybe not. I don't know that it's going to be very important.
President Trump looking ahead to a potential trilateral meeting with the leaders of Russia and Ukraine. But first, that summit with Vladimir Putin is set to start in just 24 hours. The two men will be sitting across from one another for the first time in 6 years. CNN Chief National Affairs Correspondent Jeff Zeleny joins our panel now. Jeff, wonderful to have you.
Good to see you.
This, of course, has been the big question ahead of this summit. You've seen Zelensky go from meeting to meeting with European leaders. Clearly, they all trying to show solidarity with him as everyone waits somewhat nervously to see what comes out of what's going to happen between President Trump and the Russian President Vladimir Putin. What did you make of the fact that Trump today was willing to talk about in more depth, likely including Zelensky later on?
Well, look, if the second meeting comes to pass that President Trump was talking about in the Oval Office today, that will be a sign that the first meeting actually went well. If there is a meeting with President Zelensky and Putin and Trump and European leaders, that will be a sign that peace potentially is in the offing. But a lot has to happen between now and then. And I think that all eyes obviously are on this meeting tomorrow. But what I am thinking back to is being in Helsinki in the summer of 2018 and that side-by-side press conference. It just simply was not a moment of strength for President Trump. But important to keep in mind, it's not the same President Trump. At that point, he was just a couple years on the job. And as we've seen in instance after instance, he knows the job much more now. For some people would say for better or worse, but he knows the levers of power. So is it a different Trump that goes into the meeting tomorrow, or when he's face to face with Putin, does it kind of revert to the old power structure here? So I think that's one thing just optically, but actually the substance of it, it's hard to imagine that they could reach some type of a deal where all leaders would be sitting down in short order.
Yeah.
If they are sitting down, Jeff, isn't it possible that he and Putin have agreed on something and they're going to try and pressure Zelensky to accept?
Yeah, like giving up a decent part of the eastern chunk of
but there is reason to believe that, Putin could be of a mind to make some sort of deal because his economy is in tatters. So he has some impetus, and especially if the president's willing to carry through, which he hasn't been on his threat to really crank up sanctions, then Putin does have an impetus.
Would he agree to sit down with Zelensky, though? That's a question.
That's a big question.
So let's watch a little bit of what happened back in 2018, the time that Jeff was just talking about. And of course, you saw the two of them walking there, the moment that was, heard around the world at the time. Let's watch.
My people came to me, Dan Coates came to me, and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this, I don't see any reason why it would be. I have great confidence in my intelligence people, but I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today.
Extremely strong and powerful. And Scott Jennings, we know that this is not the only place where Donald Trump has demonstrated that he believes that showing strength and power is something, honestly, that he is influenced by. What makes you think it might be different this time?
Well, I accidentally glanced at the front page of the New York Times this morning, saw the headline, Europe's leaders say Trump backs goals on Ukraine. And I also happen to remember a few weeks ago when he worked with NATO to help get hundreds of millions of dollars of lethal weapons into the hands of the Ukrainians. And so it doesn't hardly sound pro-Russia or pro-Putin to me. I think the president is put out with Putin. I think we ought to pray for peace, hope for the best, and plan for Putin to be a jerk and a thug, which is exactly what he is. But the man has solved 6 or 7 conflicts this year. I think we ought to give him some latitude to operate.
Which 6 or 7?
I'm sorry, are you not watching the
Which
news?
6 or 7?
Well, we just did Azerbaijan, we did Rwanda, we did Israel, Iran.
Israel, Iran, what? What peace deal did I miss?
Ended the 12-day war.
I mean, so you 6 or 7. I
Are
mean,
you
that's
living on Earth too?
I mean, no, but Rwanda, Azerbaijan, Rwanda, what? What are we talking about?
Casey,
the fact is we still have a country a world that's on fire. And this is the problem with
Casey.
What are you asking me for, Scott?
I'm asking you to come in here and tell people the truth. Donald Trump has created a track record this year of helping settle several conflicts.
So several is different than 6 or 7. So I was letting Bukhari.
First of all, I will say this.
We did see, Scott, to your point, after naming something after Donald Trump, we saw Azerbaijan, Armenia sit down. That was a remarkable moment. We also, I would say, the Iran situation was solved with force. But
it was, and it's still not solved. There's still no peace deal. And actually, the hostages are still not brought home in Israel, and there's still there's still uncertainty in Gaza and Israel, and we still have this blazing in Ukraine and Russia. So I want to back away from Donald Trump getting a Nobel Peace Prize. But this is my biggest issue.
Donald Trump would not like to back away from that.
But this is I think this is one of the larger issues you have with Donald Trump when compared to his predecessors, Joe Biden, particularly Barack Obama, and even his competitor in Hillary Clinton. He does not have the intellect to actually display strength on a stage of this magnitude. And so when he's standing next to a world leader like Vladimir Putin, he looks small. And so when you have an individual, and particularly as he's getting older, and he begins to muddle through his words, and I think the quote that he just said recently, there's going to be some land swapping, and it's going to be for the good of Ukraine, and then there's going to be some good and some bad, and he's not sharp or crisp with his words, you're going to see someone who looks small simply because they don't have the intellect to stand on a stage next to someone who is, yes, a thug like Vladimir Putin, and that is going to be the problem. His weakness is going to be on full display.
We're over time, and I'm going to give you the quick last word.
Well, I think you're prejudging a meeting before it's happened, number one. Number two, you're not telling the truth about his track record this year. And number three, why can't you just give the President of the United States the chance to operate here? He's earnestly trying to get to a peace deal. Shouldn't we be all hopeful for American success instead of rooting for American failure?
Yeah, no, we should.
We
should want peace in Ukraine. That is fair and just to the Ukrainians,
Totally
who are the
agree.
country
Correct.
that was invaded.
Okay, well, then I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Okay, that is a great place to press pause on this conversation. Jeff Zeleny, thank you.